Pinterest boards are going to serve as your content buckets or the place where you are housing your core content. You can see why Pinterest boards are a really important part of your Pinterest marketing strategy. So in today's episode, we are going to dive into all things Pinterest board optimization. I'm Emily Vales. I'm a Pinterest marketing and ad strategist, and for the past 4 years, I've helped my clients and my students increase their traffic and turn it into profit through the power of Pinterest marketing. So what is the deal with your Pinterest boards? I get asked a lot of questions on a daily basis about how to name Pinterest boards. How many boards should you have? Are group boards still something you should be concerned about? And I am going to break it all down for you in today's episode. So by the end of this episode, you will have a good handle on what type of boards you should have, how to optimize them, and then some tips and tricks for things that are maybe outdated or relevant today while you are marketing on Pinterest. So let's go ahead and let's dive in. So for tip number 1, I want you to do a survey of your Pinterest account and just right out of the gate, look at your boards and think about, are all of these boards relevant to my business and my niche? I know when I first started my Pinterest marketing strategy, I actually did convert a personal account to a business account, which, side note, is free and super easy to do. And I do have another video for you if you are wondering how exactly to get started with your Pinterest marketing strategy. But now back to these boards. When I converted my personal account to that business account, what I realized was I had a lot of boards that had nothing to do with Pinterest marketing. So in some ways, it was kind of like starting over from scratch. Because when I started my Pinterest account, I was one of the OG people who got the email invite. I was just pinning things I liked, such as ideas for my classroom because I'm a former teacher. I used it to plan my wedding. Years later, I used it to plan my first baby nursery. I did all of the special things that pinners do on the platform. And that's great, but it had nothing to do with my business and what I do now with Pinterest marketing. So I could have started a new account, but I decided to go with just converting my account. So what I needed to do, like I mentioned right from the beginning, was go ahead and I assessed all of the boards and I essentially either archived the board if I felt like it no longer served me. So if it was something that I was no longer interested in, then I just went ahead and archived it. And then if it was a board that I wanted to continue to pin to personally, I just went ahead and I edited the board and made it secret. So I was able to still see it, but then when people come to my Pinterest account, they can't see that content. That can also be a little confusing to not only the pinner, but also the Pinterest algorithm if you are constantly sharing that content. So an easy way to just keep that to yourself is to go ahead and make that board secret. So step number 1, just make sure that all of your boards are relevant to your content and your niche. Then step number 2, when you are deciding on the types of boards you have, you want to think about your content and what you could be creating pins for. So even if there's a board that seems like a great idea and that you would like to be ranking for those specific keywords, maybe that's something that you put off to the side until you start creating content over that specific topic. Because if you create a board just so that you can get it to rank, and you want to rank for those specific keywords, it's ultimately not going to help you if you're filling that board with other people's pins. So that's a question I also get asked a lot is, should I be pinning other people's pins to my boards? So that kind of leads to step number 3, should you be pinning other people's pins to your boards? And this question is a little muddled because the answer is yes and no. If you have content that is really inspiring and you enjoy it and it's somebody else's pin, then you can pin it to your board, but I don't recommend doing that on a regular basis. So there's not a real necessity for it. At one point, people thought that there was this unspoken rule where you had to pin 80% of other people's content and you could only pin 20% of yours. And people really did follow that rule. And since then, that has kind of gone out the window. Pinterest said there is no such rule. Just focus on your own content if you want to. And so now what I teach my students, what I do for myself, for my clients, I just focus on our content because ultimately we're using Pinterest as the tool that it should be used for, which is a traffic driver. So we are driving traffic to other people's blogs, their offers, their products, right? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So that is something else I want to mention, that if you do decide to pin other people's pins and it is inspiring to you and you think it'll serve your audience, that's fine. But I would recommend not pinning something that is going to be in direct competition for you. So that was step number 3. Now let's dive into step number 4, and that is SEO for your boards. So since Pinterest is a search engine, it's really important that everywhere on your account that you can optimize for the search engine, you do. And so with your boards, we are going to look at my Pinterest account here in a minute, but with your boards, you want to optimize both the title and the description for your boards. So when you are thinking about coming up with those titles for your boards, I did mention you want to make sure that you have boards that are relevant to your content, but you also want to make sure that when you're naming your Pinterest boards, that you are including in that title the pillar keywords that you want to be ranking for that specific topic. So remember, I shared at the very beginning of this video that your boards are essentially your content buckets. So you should have, if you haven't ever done this, you should do this. You should do keyword research for your business in your niche. And what you are going to uncover when you're doing keyword research are lots of different pillar keywords and long tail keywords. And I do have another video over Pinterest SEO if you want to learn all the ins and the outs of doing that keyword research, because that is going to be so helpful with applying those keywords to your boards. And it can also help you come up with what types of boards you should be creating. Now, remember that other step I mentioned, you do want to make sure it's relevant to your content. And it's okay to have a list of boards that are maybe set aside or put on the back burner, and you just kind of know that you will create those boards once you start creating content over that topic. But I want you to just keep in mind that those titles and that description are really important, and that SEO for your boards, because your boards can actually rank on Google, they can rank on Pinterest, and people can even filter their searches by boards as well. So it's really important that you're optimizing those boards and the title and the description. And just a pro tip when you are naming your boards, don't try to be cutesy or clever. Just think about the keywords you want to rank for and make it pretty clear, because people are just looking for the solution to their problem, and we don't need to add extra fluff or anything that could kind of skew the search results when people are trying to find your content, right? So at one point I saw somebody's account and they had put heart, the word heart, like H-E-A-R-T, in front of all of their board titles. Like, I think that they put heart just to kind of be like, I love this. And that is an example of something that's not going to help with indexing their content. So when Pinterest is trying to understand what that board is about, that word does not help with indexing those keywords, if that makes sense. So it said like heart DIY, heart whatever, modern farmhouse kitchen, I'm making this up, but heart was in front of all of those board titles, and it was just a little confusing. And I got the point that they were trying to, you know, have this fun, in a way, branded twist, but it just wasn't helpful. So just another pro tip, don't feel like you need to be cutesy or anything like that. Just make it super clear. So now let's go ahead and dive into the next step or tip. And that next step is to think about those titles for your boards and trying to have this balance of being fairly specific, but not too specific, if that makes sense. So I occasionally have seen people where, in my opinion, it's a little bit of a misstep, where they have these really broad board titles and they think it's a good idea because then essentially all of their pins, or a majority of their pins, can always be pinned to that specific board. So for example, I was working with a teacher and she just had a reading board, and that is so broad. And what is really going to serve you better is to be a little bit more specific. And that's also going to help you when you're trying to rank your boards as well. So for example, if you are a teacher, instead of having a reading board where, you know, like a lot of your content's probably gonna be able to fit on that board, you could have more specific reading based boards. So you could have guided reading, you could have phonemic awareness, you could have small reading groups, whatever, but you can see how those are much more specific. And those were things that she actually was creating content for regularly: guided reading, phonemic awareness. And so I actually mentioned that to her, like, hey, why don't we have a word work board, a guided reading board, and then we were able to take that really broad topic and kind of break it down into those more specific boards. And actually, guided reading, word work, phonemic awareness, all of those things actually had a lot of search volume in themselves anyways. So it's going to give you a better chance of ranking, like I mentioned, on Google and Pinterest when you are being a little bit more specific. So what I want to mention before we dive in and look at my Pinterest account and look at my boards, I just want to share with you that there are a couple different things that people ask about that I think can be common misconceptions. So let's break down 2 of these common misconceptions. The first one being, are group boards still relevant? And if you were wondering about that, I say don't worry about group boards. If you are a part of group boards right now, that's totally fine. You can stay in those group boards, but it's just not something that you need to be actively searching for. It's not going to improve your pin distribution like they did at one point. People found kind of a hack or a workaround back in the day, this was multiple years ago, where if they were in group boards with other creators who had lots and lots of followers, that they were seeing their pins perform much better when they pinned them to those group boards, and they just don't work that way anymore. So tip number 6 or step number 6, don't worry about group boards. Now let's go ahead and talk about step number 7. So for step number 7, let's go ahead and talk about categories on your boards. So there is an option when you were creating boards to essentially break your board into different categories or sections. And that is something that very easy, simple. I don't want you to worry about it. So like I said, easy and simple, just forget that. I don't personally use them. I don't use it for my clients. I don't recommend that to my students. And the reason for that being is if you have a board title or, the topic of your board is so broad that you need to have these different sections, in my opinion, what I think you should do is think of those sections and create boards for those specific sections. So I think that your title is probably a little bit too broad if you are having to break down that board into different sections. So that's just something else that I do get asked about. Do I use these? Do I not use the categories? So I wanted to mention that. So without further ado though, let's go ahead and let's dive in and look at my Pinterest account, creating boards, and how I'm optimizing mine.
Okay, so you can see here we are on my Pinterest account. So you are going to see the created side or the created tab. I want you to click over to the saved, and then very simply, you're just going to click on the plus sign and then click on board. So you're going to go ahead here and you'll name your board. Now remember, you are going to want to use your keyword research to inform the titles that you're using for your boards. You can make it secret if you want to. And then once you have created that board, here is an example of one of my boards. This is a newer board, so you can see there's not a lot of pins on it, but you can click on organize. And this is where I said earlier in this episode that I don't recommend utilizing the organizing and then creating sections. It's just not necessary. If you have such a broad topic board that you have to have all these different sections, I just recommend using that section and making that into its own board, if that makes sense. So let me know, in the comments of this YouTube video if that doesn't make sense or if you have follow-up questions. In order to edit the board, once you have published it, you can edit it. So you can click on edit, you can update the name, the description. You could also add collaborators to it. You can also, let's say you have 2 boards that are essentially almost the same topic, or, it doesn't make sense for them to be separated because they are similar and you don't have very many pins on either one. You can also merge boards. So some cool different features. If you click on more ideas, it'll kind of show you what's coming up for side hustles for moms. So one thing I'm going to do that I would love to invite you to do when you are thinking about naming your boards, I would love for you to go to your home feed and just simply type in, let's say I hadn't created a board, side hustles. I hadn't created my side hustles for mom board yet. Let's just say I perform that search, hustles for moms. I will perform that search now. Now it's going to pull up pins, but you can filter by boards. So I'm going to come over here on the left and filter by boards. Now let's see what all comes up for boards. So there's quite a few boards for side hustles for moms. So this shows you it's pretty competitive. saturated. So if you are wanting to find topics or titles for your boards that are less saturated, you can try to do a little bit more research. The thing is, a little bit more saturated and you start ranking really well for that specific topic, then obviously your account can really grow because it's obviously popular. So it's kind of balancing, finding ones that people are actually interested in and searching for, and also being able to rank. Like, it's not so oversaturated or so broad that, you know, it's darn near impossible to actually rank for. So you can see there is just dozens and dozens, probably hundreds, thousands of boards for side hustles for moms. Now specifically, I actually teach women how to become a Pinterest manager. And so that is, quote, the side hustle, if you want to call it that I am teaching. You can see when I type in Pinterest manager that there's definitely a decent amount that's coming up. However, look, this is my board right here, Pinterest management. That is one of the top ranking boards. So that's awesome, right? That's my board. So it shows you that is probably going to be a lot easier to rank for than side hustles. However, like I mentioned, side hustles is very popular. So if you can rank for it, it is going to probably see great results for your account growth overall. So just a little pro tip I wanted to share with you when you were thinking about board titles, saturation, and definitely refer back to my video all about doing keyword research on Pinterest, because I think this is going to be really helpful when you were thinking about trying to find those keywords. So this is just a quick overview of how to create a board, naming it, then doing a little research, seeing, you know, how competitive or what's coming up for that specific board. Just another idea and pro tip. So let's go ahead and let's wrap up this week's episode.
I hope you found this week's episode helpful. I would love for you to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and then let me know in the comments what other questions you have about Pinterest boards. You can see why they're so important. They are literally the foundation for your Pinterest marketing strategy. So I like to create content that's going to be helpful for you and serve you. So like I said, let me know in the comments what type of content you'd like to see. So I can't wait to see you soon in next week's video. Bye for now.